Interpretation of Ashlesha Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Ashlesha Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Venus, it produces a sharp, emotionally intelligent, and psychologically insightful personality. Ruled by Mercury and symbolized by the serpent, Ashlesha represents hidden power, inner coiling energy, and the capacity to mesmerize or heal through subtle influence. A benefic moon here gives intuitive depth, charisma, and the ability to understand the emotional undercurrents in others. But if afflicted, especially by Rahu, Saturn, or Mars, the moon in Ashlesha may lead to manipulation, secrecy, emotional entrapment, or passive-aggressive tendencies. Venus in Ashlesha blends sensuality with psychological complexity. When placed in angular or trinal houses and supported by Mercury or Jupiter, Venus here exudes intense magnetism, subtle charm, and the ability to love with spiritual or tantric depth. Ashlesha enhances Venus's seductiveness, but if Venus is afflicted, the native may experience obsessive attachments, possessive love, or use charm as a manipulative tool to control others emotionally. Jupiter in Ashlesha, when well placed, brings the wisdom of subtlety and spiritual insight into the shadow realms. Jupiter here acts as a psychic guide, counselor, or teacher who unravels the mysteries of life and emotions. When supported, this placement offers intuitive expansion and transformative knowledge. However, when Jupiter is afflicted, it may result in moral ambiguity, manipulation under the guise of spirituality, or belief systems used for emotional control or elitism. Mars in Ashlesha gives penetrating force and strategic execution. Mars's aggression becomes psychological rather than overt. It strikes with precision rather than power. When well placed, Mars in Ashlesha creates skilled strategists, martial artists, or researchers who act with psychological acumen. If afflicted or placed in a Jyeshtha, Mars may turn manipulative, revengeful, or sexually aggressive, coiling anger beneath an externally composed surface. Saturn in Ashlesha adds a cold, calculative restraint to this already private nakshatra. When placed with dignity, Saturn grants disciplined insight, emotional resilience, and the ability to work behind the scenes with deep focus. However, when afflicted, Saturn in Ashlesha may generate emotional isolation, control issues, or suppressed fears, manifesting as chronic anxiety or psychosomatic patterns. Saturn can stabilize Ashlesha's instability only when paired with higher awareness and purpose. Rahu in Ashlesha greatly intensifies the nakshatra's hypnotic and obsessive tendencies. When placed in good houses and supported by Mercury or Venus, Rahu in Ashlesha creates masters of emotional influence, people skilled in persuasion, psychology, or mysticism. However, under affliction, this can devolve into toxic manipulation, emotional entanglement, or deceitful power games that entrap others or the native themselves in karmic webs. Ketu in Ashlesha suggests a past life rooted in occult mastery or deep emotional experiences. In this life, Ketu brings detachment from surface emotions and a deep dive into the subconscious. When well placed, it produces intuitive healers, reclusive mystics, or therapists who have inner detachment from emotional chaos. If afflicted, Ketu in Ashlesha may cause emotional confusion, feelings of spiritual exile, or repression of desires leading to psychological friction. Mercury in Ashlesha, as the nakshatra lord, becomes especially potent, blending logic with psychological depth. A benefic Mercury here gives gifted communicators, analysts, or writers with sharp emotional acuity and persuasive power. In strong placements, Mercury in Ashlesha produces mastery over speech, marketing, or negotiation. However, when afflicted, Mercury here becomes cunning, sarcastic, or secretive, hiding true intentions behind a mask of wit or charm. Interpretation of Ashlesha Nakshatra, house placement context. When Mercury, the ruler of Ashlesha Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona 1st, 5th, 9th, Ashlesha's intricate, psychologically driven qualities find strategic expression in the outer world. For example, for Cancer ascendant, if Mercury rules the 3rd and 12th houses and is placed in the 10th house, and Moon is in Ashlesha, the native may become a public figure who exerts influence subtly, through speech, information control, or psychological insight. Ashlesha's coiling emotional power is used constructively in leadership, diplomacy, or confidential advisory roles. If Venus is placed in Ashlesha and rules the 5th and 10th houses for Capricorn ascendant, and Venus is placed in the 1st house, the native becomes emotionally magnetic, with a strong but hidden charm. Venus in the ascendant allows Asha's seductive elegance to express in the native's appearance and manner. These individuals often carry healing or hypnotic power in their presence, especially in creative or intimate partnerships, where they nurture through emotional depth and psychic attunement. When Ashlesha-linked planetary lords reside in Jyeshtha houses, 6th, 8th, or 12th, Ashlesha's energy may manifest as psychological entrapment, karmic burdens, or emotional shadow work. For instance, if Mercury is in Ashlesha and rules the 1st and 4th houses for Gemini ascendant, but Mercury is placed in the 8th house, the native may grapple with ancestral karma, hidden family dynamics, or intense emotional transformations. Their speech and identity may be marked by secrecy, but they often emerge as deep psychological healers once internal storms are transmuted. Now consider Mars in Ashlesha for Leo ascendant, ruling the 4th and 9th houses, and placed in the 5th house, Kona. Mars expresses as controlled power, channeled into strategy, emotional intelligence, or creative expression. Ashlesha's coiling influence here supports bold teaching styles, transformative romantic experiences, or expressive arts that challenge the status quo. The native may be a fierce protector of children, beliefs, or students, using intellect as their primary weapon. If Jupiter is in Ashlesha and rules the 6th and 9th houses for Aquarius ascendant, and is placed in the 4th house, the native becomes a spiritual yet psychologically aware nurturer, someone whose home, teachings, or inner life reflects profound emotional processing. The 4th house supports Ashlesha's inward pull, and Jupiter grants vision, allowing the native to act as a quiet yet potent guide in healing or ancestral resolution. Suppose Saturn is in Ashlesha and rules the 7th and 8th houses for Cancer ascendant, and is placed in the 12th house. This may create a reclusive, emotionally burdened individual who undergoes silent transformation in relationships or isolation. Saturn and Ashlesha combined in the 12th indicate karmic debt, often involving marriage, commitment, or suppressed emotions. However, with benefic aspects, this placement can yield profound mastery in spiritual psychology or karmic healing. If Rahu is in Ashlesha and Mercury is placed in the 6th house for Pisces ascendant, the native may feel compulsively drawn to solving others' problems, often entangling themselves in emotionally complex service roles. The 6th house warps Ashlesha's power into a battlefield of emotional boundaries and manipulative tendencies. If Mercury is strong, this energy can produce powerful healers, crisis managers, or reformers who work from behind the scenes. Finally, if the moon is in Ashlesha for Virgo ascendant, ruling this 11th house, and is placed in the 3rd house, the native may use emotionally intuitive communication in close circles, siblings, or digital platforms. Ashlesha's penetrating emotional nature finds voice in persuasive writing or speech. The 3rd house enhances their ability to network, while Ashlesha adds depth, making them trusted confidants or subtle influencers with an edge in negotiation, storytelling, or mentorship. Interpretation of Jyeshtha Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Jyeshtha Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Mercury, it gives an emotionally authoritative, protective, and highly perceptive personality. Ruled by Mercury and symbolized by the talisman or earring, Jyeshtha carries the power of Arohana Shakti, the ability to rise, surpass, and assume responsibility. A benefic moon here manifests as mature emotional intelligence, a sense of duty toward others, and strong protective instincts. If afflicted by Mars, Saturn, or Rahu, the moon may express as emotional superiority, manipulation, or burdens of responsibility carried from early life. Venus in Jyeshtha blends sensuality with emotional depth and magnetic leadership. When well placed in Kendra or Kona and supported by Mercury or Jupiter, Venus in this nakshatra produces refined strategists in love, those who attract with intellect and power. They tend to value relationships where loyalty and competence are tested. However, when afflicted, Venus in Jyeshtha can become emotionally controlling, secretive in love, or disillusioned by unequal partnerships. Jupiter in Jyeshtha imbues the native with the potential to guide, lead, or protect others with philosophical insight and wisdom. When strong, this placement yields powerful teachers, spiritual leaders, or defenders of the weak. Jupiter's expansiveness, when blended with Jyeshtha's authority, can build wise counselors or dharmic strategists. However, when afflicted or placed in Dushtana houses, Jupiter may become dogmatic, overly proud, or self-righteous, masking insecurity behind moral superiority. Mars in Jyeshtha drives the native toward active control, strategic defense, or covert action. A well-placed Mars brings strong protectors, courageous crisis managers, or tacticians with refined leadership skills. Jyeshtha channels Mars's aggression into command. But when afflicted, Mars in this nakshatra may lead to jealousy, vengefulness, or internalized resentment, particularly when control is threatened or loyalty is breached. Saturn in Jyeshtha enhances endurance and emotional responsibility. When well-positioned, it creates mature individuals who silently carry burdens, protect the vulnerable, and uphold duties even in adversity. Saturn here transforms life through experience, building inner strength over time. If afflicted, it can generate chronic emotional heaviness, fear of betrayal, or isolation due to being the strong one who must always keep things together. Rahu in Jyeshtha intensifies the drive for personal recognition, mastery, or leadership through strategic influence. If supported by Mercury or Jupiter, Rahu here gives charismatic public figures, advisors, or investigators who draw others through mystery and strength. However, if afflicted, Rahu may exaggerate superiority, cause manipulation for power, or create identity crises around self-worth, secrecy, and validation. Ketu in Jyeshtha reflects past life mastery, but often with emotional exhaustion or detachment from authority. The native may instinctively avoid leadership, yet still carry its karmic burden. When well-placed, Ketu gives subtle protectors, intuitive guides, or selfless reformers. When afflicted, it may lead to internal mistrust, withdrawal, or difficulty allowing others to help due to unconscious self-reliance or hyper-responsibility. Mercury in Jyeshtha is in its own nakshatra and excels in strategic thought, crisis communication, and behind-the-scenes leadership. When supported, it produces analysts, diplomats, or communicators who influence without overt domination. If afflicted, especially by Rahu or Mars, Mercury may become manipulative, secretive, or emotionally disconnected, using intellect as armor to avoid vulnerability or perceived weakness. Interpretation of Jyeshtha Nakshatra, house placement context. When Mercury, the ruler of Jyeshtha Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, Jyeshtha's qualities of mastery, responsibility, and emotional command are elevated and grounded in visible action. For example, for Scorpio ascendant, if Mercury rules the 8th and 11th houses and is placed in the 10th house and the moon is in Jyeshtha, the native becomes a skilled strategist in public life, someone who handles secrets, power, or crisis with precision and influence. Jyeshtha's emotional depth is expressed through purposeful, authoritative leadership. If Venus is in Jyeshtha and rules the 6th and 11th houses for Sagittarius ascendant and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the native brings grace and magnetism into crisis navigation, partnerships, or social reform. Jyeshtha's intensity fuses with Venus's charm, producing persuasive communicators, legal defenders, or those who lead in emotionally charged environments. When benefically placed, this fosters creative resilience and deep emotional intelligence. When afflicted, love may become transactional or overly controlling. When a Jyeshtha-linked planet has its lord placed in a Dushtana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the emotional burdens and karmic themes of control, secrecy, and responsibility intensify. For instance, if Jupiter is in Jyeshtha and rules the 2nd and 5th houses for Pisces ascendant, but is placed in the 6th house, the native may face conflict in family, values, or children, often having to navigate karmic power dynamics or moral dilemmas in service-oriented roles. Jyeshtha's sense of being the protector becomes entangled with emotional expectations and karmic obligations. Now consider Mars in Jyeshtha for Leo ascendant, ruling the 4th and 9th houses and placed in the 1st house, Kendra. The native becomes an emotionally intense, protective, and commanding individual, someone who instinctively defends family or belief systems with passion. Mars's presence energizes Jyeshtha's secretive nature, turning the personality into a tactful but powerful leader. If afflicted, there may be a tendency to dominate, assert control over others' emotions, or act from a wounded place of pride. If Saturn is in Jyeshtha and rules the 6th and 7th houses for Gemini ascendant and is placed in the 12th house, the native may carry emotional weight linked to sacrifice, separation, or subconscious fears of betrayal. An afflicted Saturn here may produce loneliness masked by competence or karmic duties that isolate the person emotionally. However, when supported by Jupiter or Venus, this Saturn fosters deep spiritual resilience, service through institutions, and leadership in silent strength. Suppose Rahu is in Jyeshtha for Virgo ascendant, and Mercury, its nakshatra lord, is placed in the 9th house. The native may become a charismatic intellectual using esoteric or unconventional knowledge for influence. Rahu exaggerates Jyeshtha's desire to know more than others, and Mercury in the 9th channels this into philosophical or foreign pursuits. If well placed, the native thrives as a global strategist or thought leader. If afflicted, they may be caught in intellectual elitism or struggle to ground their ambitions. If Ketu is in Jyeshtha and Mercury is in the 3rd house for Capricorn ascendant, the native may retreat from social competition, preferring roles where quiet mastery or observation defines their success. Ketu in Jyeshtha brings withdrawal from superficial recognition but enhances deep intuitive skill. The native may be a silent force in sibling dynamics, communication, or neighborhood affairs. When afflicted, this may show as aloofness, suppressed speech, or distrust in emotional intimacy. Finally, if the moon is in Jyeshtha for Aries ascendant and rules the 4th house, placed in the Strat 8th house, the native may experience early emotional intensity, hidden family burdens, or transformative maternal influence. This moon is protective but burdened, with a tendency to carry ancestral emotional weight. If supported by Jupiter or Mercury, it gives inner strength to counsel or guide others through pain. If afflicted, it may create emotional defensiveness, secrecy in love, or fear of betrayal masked by a controlling facade. Interpretation of Revati Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Revati Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Mercury, its ruler, or Jupiter, it gives rise to a compassionate, imaginative, and emotionally giving personality. Ruled by Mercury and symbolized by a pair of fish swimming in opposite directions, Revati carries the Shakti of nourishment and safe journey. A benefic moon here expresses emotional empathy, intuitive understanding, and a desire to guide others toward completion, healing, and inner peace. If afflicted, especially by Rahu, Saturn, or Ketu, it may result in escapism, emotional oversensitivity, or difficulty setting boundaries in personal relationships. Venus in Revati brings poetic charm, a nurturing presence, and sensual grace that leans toward emotional fantasy. When supported by Mercury or Jupiter, Venus here enhances romantic idealism, artistic healing, and spiritual bonding. The native becomes a caregiver through beauty or affection. When afflicted, Venus may show up as romantic disillusionment, over-attachment, or vulnerability in relationships due to excessive emotional merging. Jupiter in Revati amplifies the nurturing, forgiving, and spiritual tendencies of this nakshatra. The native becomes a guide, teacher, or spiritual well-wisher who serves through wisdom and unconditional kindness. When well-placed, Jupiter gives expansive emotional intelligence, prophetic insight, or dharmic caregiving. If afflicted, however, Jupiter may become overindulgent in faith, self-sacrificing to a fault, or confused between service and self-neglect. Mars in Revati softens its otherwise aggressive drive and channels it toward protective action or spiritual discipline. When supported, Mars here produces courageous healers, intuitive defenders, or champions of the vulnerable. The emotional fire becomes more internal and sacrificial. When afflicted, Mars may result in passive-aggressive behavior, escapist tendencies, or inner emotional restlessness masked by external service. Saturn in Revati brings long-suffering patience, emotional responsibility, and karmic completion through service and introspection. When dignified, Saturn gives disciplined spiritual practitioners, emotionally wise caretakers, or those who guide others at the end of karmic cycles. When afflicted, however, it can lead to emotional stagnation, martyrdom, or overwhelming guilt associated with past karmas or unhealed family patterns. Rahu in Revati intensifies the desire to save, heal, or escape. A well-placed Rahu may make the native a popular figure in healing arts, performance, or service. Rahu here gives psychic sensitivity and the urge to protect the collective. But when afflicted, Rahu may bring emotional confusion, savior complex, or loss of identity in fantasy or delusional spirituality. Ketu in Revati dissolves emotional attachment and brings past life spiritual depth. The native may be a natural mystic, intuitive guide, or emotionally detached server. When supported, Ketu here gives spiritual mastery, clarity and emotional silence, and compassion free from ego. If afflicted, however, it may create disconnection from reality, emotional isolation, or psychic overload. Mercury in Revati, being the nakshatra's ruler, blends intellect with emotional softness. The native often expresses deep emotional nuance through writing, teaching, or guidance. When well supported, Mercury in Revati gives eloquent counselors, artists, and emotionally intelligent communicators. When afflicted, especially by Saturn or Rahu, it may result in mental escapism, over-rationalizing feelings, or emotional confusion clouded by indecisiveness or overanalysis. Interpretation of Revati Nakshatra. House placement context. When Mercury, the ruler of Revati Nakshatra, is placed in Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, the nurturing, imaginative, and emotionally sensitive qualities of Revati get anchored through action, dharma, and real-world impact. For Pisces ascendant, if Mercury rules the 4th and 7th houses and is placed in the 1st house, and the moon is in Revati, the native exhibits a highly intuitive and gentle personality, someone who emotionally leads through compassion, caregiving, and deep interpersonal understanding. The 1st house amplifies Revati's protective, wise, and service-driven emotional style, often seen in counselors, artists, or soulful guides. If Venus is in Revati and rules the 3rd and 8th houses, for Sagittarius ascendant, and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the emotional theme becomes one of romantic idealism, artistic storytelling, or service-based creativity. Love becomes a form of healing, and the native might express emotional energy through performance, child mentorship, or spiritual art. When afflicted, Venus here may cause emotional sacrifice in romance or confusion between fantasy and real emotional fulfillment. When a planet in Revati has its ruler placed in a Dushtana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the nurturing and empathic drive of the nakshatra may become burdened with karmic healing duties, emotional exhaustion, or the need to serve in seclusion. For example, if Mercury is in Revati and rules the 1st and 10th houses, for Gemini ascendant, but Mercury is placed in the 8th house, the native may emotionally absorb ancestral or collective pain. However, they may also become healers, mystics, or counselors who help others transform through shadow work or esoteric knowledge. If supported, this gives quiet mastery. If afflicted, it may cause nervous exhaustion or disconnection from one's own emotions. Consider Mars in Revati for Aries ascendant, ruling the 1st and 8th houses, and placed in the 12th house. This configuration produces a hidden spiritual warrior, one whose emotional battles are internal and karmic. Mars may drive toward moksha, retreats, or protecting others from behind the scenes. If afflicted, this Mars may express as escapist aggression, internalized frustration, or sacrificial actions that leave emotional depletion. If Jupiter is in Revati and rules the 9th and 12th houses, for Cancer ascendant, and is placed in the 10th house, Kendra, the native becomes emotionally aligned with dharmic career goals. They serve through knowledge, religion, or higher education, driven by empathy and moral vision. This placement turns Revati's emotional depth into public guidance. If afflicted, Jupiter may manifest as emotional self-righteousness, misplaced generosity, or burnout from over-serving without boundaries. Suppose Saturn is in Revati and rules the 6th and 7th houses for Leo ascendant and is placed in the 3rd house. The emotional tone becomes disciplined, karmic, and tied to sibling relationships or communication duties. The native may carry emotional responsibility in marriage or professional dealings. When supported, this Saturn builds emotional resilience, especially in service-oriented work. When afflicted, it may lead to suppressed emotions, difficult partnerships, or struggles to express one's needs. If Rahu is in Revati and Mercury is placed in the 2nd house for Aquarius ascendant, the native's emotional energy may channel into vocal expression, spiritual speech, or saving others through compassion. Rahu amplifies the mystical emotional sensitivity of Revati and may push the native toward fame through healing arts. When afflicted, Rahu here can cause emotional confusion, over-identification with spiritual status, or boundary issues in family or speech. If Ketu is in Revati and Mercury is placed in the 9th house, for Libra ascendant, the native carries past life spiritual wisdom, inner detachment, and a quiet emotional dignity. Ketu in Revati suggests a soul finishing a cycle of caregiving or divine service. When supported, this brings graceful renunciation, emotional maturity, and subtle charisma. When afflicted, it may show as emotional withdrawal, spiritual fatigue, or difficulty finding joy in worldly pursuits. Finally, if the moon is in Revati for Virgo ascendant and rules the 11th house, placed in the 7th house, the native may form emotional bonds through shared visions, ideals, or humanitarian partnerships. Emotional fulfillment comes through relating, guiding, and offering safe emotional passage to others. When well supported, this configuration gives empathetic advisors or partners who serve from the heart. When afflicted, it may cause emotional overgiving, codependence, or a tendency to attract needy or draining relationships.